I'm happy to announce that I know most of you, so except our foreign visitors. So the museum world in Latvia is small, and I think the part of the issues we were talking about is what is the value of museum worker in this cultural landscape of Latvia that we have. The one important thing, museum workers are very dedicated. Trust me, I've traveled around also the countryside museums. If you ask someone to open museum, and we came so far, and could you, and would you, people in general would do that. And in Lipke Memorial, we try to do the same. One time I almost missed opera, just because a lovely German couple was deeply involved in listening about Lipke's life. But what I want to say, it's not only, we talked about the money and how to manage museums, but in some cases it is actually that weird thing that people actually love what they do, and they participate and they think that this is important. So I run a museum. But if we are talking in English, that actually I'm director of the museum, but actually I would be like executive director of the museum, because we have a tiny board and I have a boss, meaning someone who is running NGO, that's Žanis Lipke Memorial. It's been established in 2004. So those are the very beginnings of the Žanis Lipke Memorial idea. And the fundraising, and then museum was born and opened the doors in 2012, and officially publicly opened in 2013 when President of Israel came to visit Shimon Peres. Okay, so just a few things I just want to talk about. The notion that museums engaged in activist practice, it's very new, and especially new probably here in Eastern Europe. In Western Europe, I know that people are talking about that for the last 10 years. Because talking about inequality and injustice and environment crisis and the refugee crisis, we always think that someone else has to do it, and we as a cultural institutions have to be in a way neutral. But as you all know, neutral, it's fake news neutral. The people are never neutral. We live in this society, we're influenced by this society, we're as prejudiced in many cases as society we live in. And just to illustrate what happened in 2015, we had a historical lecture about the gays and how they were treated in 30s and 40s and later. Just a lecture by a historian, Kenneth, who's been doing the research. We had 2 radio stations, television, all cramped in a museum, filming and recording it. And only later I discovered that we were all this time guarded by the police. Because it was not, we collaborated, we didn't organize it. So just someone asked me, can you let policemen go? And I was like, what policemen? We never had policemen here, except for, some Israeli ambassador visiting. And so it turns out that this is a different story. So we got few, of course, hate mails about this historical lecture. But that also shows something that is very important, that museums can be open space of, even if our museum is dedicated to the rescue of Jews, but one of the ideas, what is very important, is that persecution and denouncing of the neighbors, it comes from somewhere, and it comes from this prejudice about the people who are different or belong to a different religion or act differently from us. So the one time we actually needed police protection was a lecture about refugees, because that was very violent, and there were people who were screaming. But as we saw recently, a discussion organized by Satori about the kind of same problematic got the same reaction. People came and just screamed and didn't let the panel even discuss things. So this is something you have to kind of understand, that these are not issues that museums can go in easily, and not to, in a way, a little bit protect their own, museum workers that actually do that. That's why making waves, and I'm not talking, the Lipke Memorial only is making waves. First of all, I'm from Latvia. Second of all, it sounds like a bragging, or it sounds like, no, you actually don't do that much waves, But what is important to understand is, when you deal with these complicated issues about minorities, anything to do with Holocaust and Jews, you have to understand that there's a backlash or hate speech or threats on everyday basis. So can you ask your museum workers, not me myself, that I'm used to it by now, but can you ask people who work in a museum to deal with it and to pay the price for museum doing the work? So this is one issue, and so as I mentioned, very politely making waves. We haven't had some horrible scandals or something like that. So, and also any kind of activism, and we participated in work with the school kids, and we did the posters, and we tried to kind of tell them what would be like burning issues for their lives, after they visit museum. And so it always starts with active socializing. You do have to talk to people. Are your ideas relevant? Maybe it's all been done before. And I mentioned the country of introverts because, the introvert campaign that we were famous in London, of Latvian literature being introverts. But people are not that willing to be seen on a public stage standing for issues, because it's not an easy job, and you become kind of a target. The idea of social justice, it's very hard to talk to people. For example, we have all kinds of schools visiting. So when we have schools, sometimes those are Russian speaker schools, that sometimes they're first time in a museum, and you can't judge those kids that they don't know how to behave, or they scream, or they get lost, or they lock themselves out, or they go out smoking at the museum. Because if you want to have only good schools and good pupils and everyone coming like the best students, of course you lose audience. And then turns out for the part of the class, it was important. They got involved. They reacted. So it's one of those things when you try to get you speak many languages, at least also to involve the Russian speaking population in Latvia. You still get it's complicated, because when we as a museum try to show what Roma cultures and how they commemorate their own genocide, or what are their music, we had 6 visitors. And I'll show some other things that we completely failed at that, so because people were just not interested, or it was not communicated right. So one thing is like, why do you talk about Jews, or why do you talk about Holocaust? Let's talk about many minorities. And we do, and we try, and sometimes we are successful, and sometimes it just doesn't work because nobody cares. Things that do work. The movie. I know for most of you, I hope some of you have seen it. It's a movie about Žanis Lipke. So the movie has been seen by 45,000 people, and for Latvia it's a lot. And also a lot of Russian population. That was, but centenary movies was not the case, so this one kind of got audience. We as a museum won, we collaborated, we didn't have that much influence over like the last cut or anything, but we collaborated during when the script was written, and we kind of helped as we could. So we get, after this movie, what we win as a museum is people with questions. My favorite one, of course, is like, so the movie. What is exactly true in that movie? So scene by scene, you know. But this is the people come and they seek truth, and they are and they take the movie at the face value. They ask me questions, why Žanis Lipke didn't rescue his friend or his daughter, you know, and they have to explain that, listen, he actually did and he hid, but in a movie for drama you need a different. So museum at this point is this kind of the bridge between the story of the picture of 1942 of Žanis and Johanna Lipke, the people who rescued Jews, and the movie story, you know, that was obviously needed to make drama. So, and in that point, museum is very, in a way, humbled, because if we can reach working about 10,000 people a year who get involved or who participate in museum activities and discussions and things like that, the museum, the movie that was made, at least Lipke's name is now recognized. You know, I can tell you that everyone recognized Žanis Lipke because there was a museum. It's just simply not true, and turns out. That's just basics for people who don't know who Žanis Lipke is. But why it is easy to connect the museum that's dedicated to the Jewish rescue in Latvia to all kind of contemporary issues, because one of the ideas and one of our museum mission is very, very simple. You'll laugh and you'll cry, but it is to make world a better place. Meaning to kind of find these the prejudice and the stereotypes, and to try to talk about and I hope that in the near future we'll talk more about gray zones. What is this? Not about here are the rescuers and perpetrators and bystanders, but exactly this gray zone of bystanders, because those are us at this point. This is our society. So from this the picture, it's someone hiding in a bunker. The idea is from this to build a museum. Of course, it's impossible to do, because you can't only talk about why these people had to be hiding and why they had to be protected. These are people that we do lack faces of. You can go to Jews in Latvia Museum and you will learn more about the community. And one of the things about also in the movie and in the stories, the problem also with museums of rescue is who exactly are people that are rescued and who are the people helping each other, and about how to talk about the synergy between a rescuer and a rescued and the connection between them. So we're doing now children's kind of comics to work with high school students to have these conversations that are at least recorded or in memoirs. You know, what is the connection between people who were rescued and people they rescued? Otherwise, it would be the worst case that these are these passive, suffering lambs in dark, you know? And that's simply not the truth. And also to say how difficult that it would be to do. So this is Elik Shmulyan, the doctor, and this is the picture. It was preserved by a woman that he loved and he rescued together with Žanis Lipke. So this is all very faded. You have to build up, and you have to understand why in a modern society it's worth to talk about these issues. And this is Žanis Lipke's friend who was Jewish, and they run shady business, and they were into contraband together, and they were selling stuff, and he appears already in the Latvian newspapers as a smuggler in 1929. So he was well prepared before the war. But, so what are these connections and how we do build connections? That is something that is very important. So just to see, that's his family on the left, and this is how it looks in a movie. You can mention and you can tell me every single stereotype that's in this picture. If he's a Jewish man, how does he look like? How his daughter looks like. You understand? Because this is how we work, and this is how movies work. So the museum has this task to kind of complicate the matters. Okay, and So just to mention two important points why it was very interesting to work in a movie project and to travel around in the schools and to talk about the movie and the Lipke story was because people have many questions, and what was most interesting, they had lots of questions about Soviet times that I wasn't ready about. Like the people were interested what happened to the family after when Soviets came in, and none of them asked what happened to Jewish people after the war, actually, because that's, you know, you ask what is kind of around you and what you've been through. So two important things about neutrality, that it doesn't exist in museums because we don't exist outside society. So one example about many probably have heard about the National Museum in Bosnia-Herzegovina in 2012. Do you know the story? Perhaps you don't tell. You know the story. So in Sarajevo, there's a museum, and there's a shutdown, a financial shutdown in a museum. So a museum that has about like 4 million objects and has been open for 124 years shuts down. There's no electricity, that's it, bankruptcy. State is not functioning, the National Museum. So what did people do? Wild guess. They didn't hit the streets, really. They didn't go they didn't the whole wall didn't went out to protest, how can you close the museum? What happened is museum workers worked for 3 years for free. So if that's not the mission, then we don't know what is. And they did a hashtag. It was "Ja sam muzej." So I'm museum myself, meaning I'm museum. And that changed something. Now the museum is functioning, and they got the prize for actually protecting and guarding the heritage. But what was very important to understand is the question. So, if you work in a museum, would you do that? What would you do to protect it, or what would you do to get involved? And another important thing is to understand that museum visitors that come and visit not only movies and not only discussion place, but they are not a clean slate. They are not white page, and in many cases they have so many layers already and stereotypes about the issues that we as a museum also have to get not the answers, but at least understand that it is these are complicated questions. So apart from being a museum worker and working there, I want to improve the society I live in the civil society, in more ways that I can do in a museum. So I'll just tell you about one of the actions I organized with my friends, and this is the letter. It's probably hard to read. I'm just telling you what it is. It was when there was the commemoration of 75 years of Rumbula massacre that happened here near Riga, and local Jews, 25,000, were killed in 2 days. It was very important for me to do something also at the city center, like in the heart of the city. It was Freedom Monument, to commemorate the people who were, the neighbors, the part of the Latvian Society, and they were murdered. And it's not just the thing that we go and commemorate in the forest. There should be some step to involve the Latvian Society in it. So I talked to people, to my friends, to historians, to the Jewish also, community here. Is it possible, and what do they think about doing it next to the Freedom Monument? To say that people were skeptic is to say nothing, but of course. And I didn't want to put under my name museum for one reason. If it fails, I failed, not the museum. Nobody shows up for that. It's fine. It's okay. So that's why we couldn't ask even for the garbage cans from municipality, just to be clear. And the idea was to put candles in. So this letter was signed by 300 people. We sent it out and asked people who are of importance in the society or in Latvia and kind of well-known people to put their signature, so they support it. So we ended up next to the Freedom Monument. And lots of people came up, and it's the idea that you can put a candle all night, not long till midnight. So there's no words said, there's no music, there's nothing, just basically the work was media beforehand, what it is and what we commemorate and what actually happened in Rumbula. So this is how it looked like, so we've been doing it since, and these are things you can't do if you don't have volunteers, people involved, people helping. It can be done not by a museum and not by 3 people. And this is just the picture. This man you see walking, that he's a man who established the Jews in Latvia Museum that Marine is from. So he came also to commemorate his family, where everyone was killed during Holocaust, and he came for candles. And it was terribly windy, especially this year. It was horrible. It was cold and nasty. And I told him, it's okay. We'll kind of protect the candles. Just put them down. And I said, yeah, but it was cold then, back then, also 77 years ago. And he said, it was cold, but not that windy. So just to stand there with all these people around who are trying to protect the candles because it's really windy, and to have also someone who remembers it, why and when it happened, it kind of builds the connection, and it has a different story to tell for the people and for us thinking as a society who we are and who we include in that. This is the one to brag. This is the president of Latvia. He came to the Freedom Monument. We didn't know that till the very last, till the protocol showed up actually. So in the very, very end of this action, that this year, the president shows up. And the protocol asks what you're supposed to do here. And I'm like, nothing, basically you put the candle, you commemorate. So we had a conversation, but it wasn't well publicized at all. It wasn't in newspapers or magazines. Like, we knew it because we were there, and the president, put the picture out on Twitter, but it wasn't. Just so you know, these are the friends and volunteers, and this is the car that police allowed us to get next to the Freedom Monument, that you're not allowed to do it, just to put garbage bags in. So this is like the highlights and lowlights, but this is also this is the one thing to know what's happening. Today is the 9th of May, and I think in Russia there's a big celebration, obviously, and we have a celebration here not nearby in a Victory Square, and we don't have any ability really to talk about it, because we kind of perceive that these are two communities that are either one is commemorating, one is celebrating, and there's a lot of maybe tension and anger. So what is really hard, I think that none of the museums, and not us either, we haven't dealt really with that problem. We haven't, there's movies made. Movies are always kind of running. But this kind of way of commemoration and how complicated and diverse and in a way, we don't have it. It's always political. And there's no way for kind of zoom out and look at it as different ways to commemorate. So this was a lecture in a museum that talked about how we talk about refugees and how media writes about the refugees and who are the refugees. And the lecture also found so many similarities between 40s, how you talk about other nationalities, how you talk about Roma people, how you talked about Jews. So it was kind of, the idea that even in media, now, if you write in some media outlets. If you write about refugees, you're not allowed to put pictures of mothers and children because that creates the wrong mood. So so that was the one lecture with the pictures that was shown, and the people did come, and the people were interested to talk about it. And this looked like, you know, this kind of, the people, we didn't have enough chairs, so it looked like this ship that was stuck together, and reminded very much of the woodshed under what was the bunker, you know, where actually people were rescued. So this doesn't exist anymore, but you can come to the memorial and you can see the woodshed. And another thing that got people involved and brought us a lot of discussion was the theater that actually talks about also the Holocaust theme, the theme of forgiveness, and the theme of common language, and maybe impossibility of common language. So the play was in Russian and in Latvian, and the actress who was playing Bruno Schulz, who is a Polish painter and writer, and he was killed in the Holocaust. So she spoke in Latvian play with the Russian accent, and in Russian play she was the one that didn't have an accent, and all the three other actors have a Latvian accent. So it was about the strangeness, and you can hear it even in language, you know. So that was always the museums are talked about, like, get new public and new people, you know. In many cases, people who came to see the plays have never been in a museum, including Archbishop of Latvia, but he didn't like the play. So yeah, but this is like, behind that is actually, behind all this is the museum, you know, so you could only see exhibition while the play was running. So this is what we are trying to avoid, and this is this kind of stereotyping people into roles, especially talking about the wartime. And so I hope you'll come and see us in this our hidden museum. We have a lot of pointers now. We really asked municipality for 4 years, and you can easier to find it now. So I hope you come, and I hope we will be able also to deal with kind of heavier and more loaded issues. Thank you.
Several times my one question to you changed, because we will have a panel discussion later on, so we save some time. But then I thought, in the end, you gave almost too many points to prove that you are worth the Kenneth Hudson Prize, because you keep running, you're not sort of you're dwelling on the laurels. No, you keep doing things, phenomenal things. But then I was really wondering, the last point that you mentioned, it's 9th of May, right?
Yeah.
It's Europe Day, we know it's interpretation when the war ended, and so on and so on. Mm-hmm. The next innovation prize, if the one will be awarded in this region, will be for a museum who can sort it out.
No, museums won't be able to sort it out, but just to give the platform.
Giving something to people, inviting.
Yeah.
I have a friend who yesterday posted on Facebook, got naturalized, that's how it's called, got a passport, Latvian passport. Not an alien anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And I know him since I was 18 something, and I'm 40 now. Okay?
Yeah.
And imagine what would that mean to talk to these Russians of Latvians of Russian descent. This is how we should call them. And you know, invite them for a talk to do something, you know. I have no solution for it, but I know that no museum does that.
You know, I've done a few demonstrations and all kinds of organizing the protests, but the one thing, and I'm ashamed to tell you that I didn't do, and I didn't have courage, and I didn't get organized and didn't ask people to do it, is when there was this idea that the people who live in Latvia and have Latvian citizenship, they could actually choose and write in their passports that they're Latvian. You know, because they were brought up maybe by Latvian stepfather or stepmother, or many other complicated things happen. And the idea is, like, if someone is not Latvian in your family, you're not allowed to write it. So it's like if it's Belarusian or Polish or Russian or anything. So the idea was that actually I have my great-grandmother is Estonian and a grandmother is German. So, you know, and I'm Latvian. So, and someone told me, Lolita, those are normal nationalities. Meaning, you won't have a problem that someone writes to you Latvian. But the idea was that the people who have passports where it's written Latvian, they would come and say, look, we have Polish and we have Roma people and we have all these other things. And the idea would be just to show up with kind of your passport or with the pictures of your grandfather or grandmother, and just to show that we come from very different cultural and national and ethnic heritage.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
I didn't do that.
Even showing your passports, I'm not saying National Museum, but even in Lipke, showing your passport in a museum would be, you know, a statement.
Yeah, yeah. That, and I somehow lost the courage, and I thought it will be political, and we are sometimes trashed enough as it is, and yeah. So.
But fair enough. Well, enough points from Lolita at this point about the social activism. We'll get back to it in the panel discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, and now.
Thank you.